Hello, rounded Taurus. There is a kind of gift you may have carried for so long that you stopped noticing how much strength it takes to carry it. People have probably praised you for being steady, dependable, patient, and capable of staying when other people would have walked away. But very few have stopped to ask a more difficult question. What has all that staying cost you? Because there is one version of your story that everyone recognizes, the Taurus who knows how to build, protect, endure, and keep life standing when everything around them feels uncertain. That version is real, but it may only be the surface of something much deeper. Beneath your patience can live an old relationship with safety, one shaped by the belief that if you remain steady enough, keep your promises, maintain what you have built, and avoid unnecessary disruption, life will remain manageable. And sometimes that instinct becomes so familiar that you stop asking whether you are choosing stability or simply protecting yourself from the discomfort of change. What once helped you feel grounded can quietly become the very thing that keeps you standing in a place where your spirit has already begun asking for more room. Imagine someone who learned very early that being reliable made the world feel safer. From the outside, that can look like maturity, strength, even wisdom, but inside it can become exhausting because there is rarely an off switch. Taurus may notice when something in life begins to feel unstable, and instead of immediately walking away, they may instinctively try to strengthen the foundation, repair what is damaged, wait for things to settle, or give the situation more time. Not because they are unaware of what hurts, but because they understand how much effort it took to build what is already there. Over time, that instinct can become more than patience. It can become a form of emotional protection. Holding things together may feel safer than admitting that something has changed, because change asks you to step away from what you already know and enter a space where the ground has not been tested yet. A difficult relationship, an unfulfilling routine, a career that once mattered, or even an identity you worked hard to create, can become difficult to release. For the same reason, somewhere inside, letting go can feel less like freedom and more like losing the evidence of everything you invested. And this is where the story becomes more personal. There is a question that many people may never think to ask a Taurus, and perhaps one you have rarely asked yourself. When was the last time you questioned whether something you were holding still deserved to be held, not whether you could endure it, because you probably can, not whether you could make it work for another year, another season, or another chapter, but whether the thing itself still belongs in the life you are becoming? There is a quiet pattern that can form when reliability becomes closely tied to self-worth. The more you maintain, the more valuable you may feel. The more you protect, provide, repair, and remain dependable, the easier it becomes to believe that your strength is proven by how much you can continue carrying without asking anyone to see the weight. But there is a difference between having strong roots and refusing to move simply because the roots have grown deep, and that difference can be difficult to recognize when familiarity has become almost indistinguishable from safety. Think about a foundation that has supported a house for many years. Its strength is not measured by how long it can remain untouched. A foundation exists to support life, and life itself changes around it. Rooms are rebuilt, windows open toward different views, old walls are removed, and new spaces are made. In the same way, your ability to remain steady does not mean you are required to preserve every structure forever. Sometimes the most honest form of stability is knowing when something needs to be renovated, released, or allowed to grow beyond the shape it once had. This is why the distinction between commitment and attachment matters so much for you. Commitment says, "I am here because this still has meaning." Attachment can quietly say, "I am here because I have already given too much to leave." They may look almost identical from the outside, especially when both involve patience and endurance, but inside they come from very different places. One is a conscious choice rooted in value, while the other can be an old fear of wasting everything you have already invested. Perhaps this began much earlier than you realize. Maybe you learned that being the dependable one made other people feel secure, or that keeping your emotions contained helped prevent situations from becoming unpredictable. It does not have to come from one dramatic experience. Sometimes it grows through years of small lessons, through being praised for being mature, responsible, easy to rely on, or capable of handling more than people expected. Eventually, the role becomes so familiar that you stop distinguishing between who you are and what you learn to do in order to feel safe. That is why questions about what you truly want can sometimes feel more complicated than they should. You may know exactly what you can maintain, what you can afford to lose, what you can repair, and what you can tolerate, yet still find yourself standing quietly in front of a much simpler question: does this still nourish me? There is a difference between knowing how to preserve something and knowing whether it deserves another season of your life. And recognizing that difference can bring an unexpected kind of honesty. So perhaps the question to carry with you is not, why can't I change? Maybe the more revealing question is, what am I protecting so faithfully that I have stopped asking whether it still reflects who I am? You do not need to abandon your patience, your loyalty, your steadiness, or the part of you that knows how to build something slowly and well. Those qualities are part of your strength, but they become more powerful when they are guided by conscious choice rather than fear of uncertainty. There may come a moment when you realize that creating space is not the same as destroying what you built. Letting something change does not erase the years you gave to it, and choosing a different direction does not make your previous commitment meaningless. The roots remain part of the story even when the branches begin reaching somewhere new. And the ground beneath you can still be solid while you allow yourself to grow beyond what once felt like the only safe shape for your life. This is where your understanding of security begins to change. Security is not always the familiar room, the predictable routine, the relationship you have already invested in, or the structure you know how to maintain with your eyes closed. Sometimes security is the quiet confidence that even when circumstances change, you will still know how to return to yourself. And when that realization begins to settle in, you may discover that what you once called stability was sometimes simply fear, wearing a very convincing, very patient face. What you are being invited to consider is not whether you should hold on or let go. It is whether you can become more discerning about what deserves your devotion. What if the next form of security does not come from holding tighter, but from knowing what is truly worth carrying forward? What if the greatest expression of your strength is not how long you can remain in one place, but how wisely you can recognize when the soil beneath your life is ready for something new to take root? That realization does not need to arrive dramatically. It can begin quietly, in the moment you admit that something no longer feels the way it once did, or when you notice that endurance has started asking more from you than the situation gives back. It may begin with a single honest boundary, a decision to stop forcing what has become strained, or simply the willingness to sit with uncertainty without immediately rebuilding the old structure. And perhaps that is where a different kind of Taurus strength begins. Not in holding everything together, but in learning what is truly worth holding as your life continues to take shape. If something in this pattern has felt strangely familiar, don't dismiss that recognition. Sometimes the first sign of change is simply realizing that something you were called strength for years may also have been a way of protecting yourself. And once you see the pattern clearly, a quieter question begins to rise beneath it. What are you still holding because it truly matters? And what are you holding because letting go would force you to face uncertainty? For Taurus, this can become one of the most difficult questions to answer because reliability can feel deeply connected to safety. You may have learned early that being the person who stays, provides, keeps promises, and holds things together gives life a sense of order. As long as you remain dependable, as long as you can keep going, as long as you don't create unnecessary disruption, there is a certain comfort in knowing where you stand. But over time, that comfort can become a quiet form of self-sabotage when endurance starts replacing honesty. You may notice this in ordinary moments. In a relationship, you might keep adjusting yourself because you have already invested so much into making the connection work. In your career, you may remain in a position that no longer feels meaningful because you remember how long it took to build your experience and establish your place there. Even in your personal life, you could become so accustomed to maintaining routines, responsibilities, and familiar structures that you hardly notice when they stop nourishing you. And then one day, when everything is finally quiet, you realize how much energy has gone into preserving a life you may no longer fully recognize as your own. This is where patience can become difficult to distinguish from fear. Patience says, I am willing to give this time because it still has meaning. Fear says, I cannot leave because I have already given too much. From the outside, the two can look almost identical, especially when both involve loyalty, endurance, and a willingness to stay through difficult seasons. But inside, they lead to very different places, and Taurus may sometimes need to ask which one is actually guiding the choice. The uncomfortable truth is that no one may have asked you to carry everything as carefully as you do. You may have decided long ago that this was simply the safest way to live. Perhaps it began when being responsible earned you trust, when being calm helped keep things predictable, or when you discovered that people could rely on you more easily when you kept your own uncertainty hidden. It doesn't have to come from one dramatic experience. Sometimes it is built through hundreds of small moments in which you hear, "You can handle it, you're so dependable," or "I knew I could count on you," until being the one who can handle everything quietly becomes part of your identity. And the difficult part about a belief formed that early is that it rarely announces itself as a belief. It simply feels like who you are. You may call it loyalty, maturity, patience, responsibility, or strength without noticing that underneath those qualities, there might also be an old fear of instability. That is why the question, "What do I actually want?" can sometimes feel strangely unfamiliar. You may know what needs to be maintained, what needs to be protected, what everyone expects from you, and what you have already invested, but knowing what truly feels alive inside you can require a completely different kind of attention. For years, the easier question may have been, "How can I make this work?" rather than, "Do I still want this to work?" Those questions sound similar, but they are not the same. One measures your ability to endure and preserve. The other asks you to listen to your values, your needs, and the quiet changes happening within you. And when you begin asking the second question honestly, you may discover that some things have remained in your life, not because they still belong there, but because you became exceptionally good at carrying them. There is also a deeper spiritual idea beneath this pattern. Sometimes a strength develops around the very place where a person once felt most vulnerable. The ability to create stability can grow from having known uncertainty. The ability to provide can grow from having once needed reassurance. The instinct to build something solid can come from remembering what it felt like when nothing seemed dependable. In that sense, your strength is real, but understanding where it came from allows you to use it consciously instead of letting an old survival strategy make every decision for you. Think of water moving slowly through earth. It does not force its way through by becoming harder than the ground. It finds the places where the soil can soften, where something has opened enough to let movement begin. Taurus can sometimes live like the earth itself has to remain perfectly firm, believing that security means nothing should shift too quickly. But even healthy ground changes with seasons, rain, roots, and time. What remains alive is not always what remains unchanged. This may be the part of the story that asks the most from you. Every time you preserve something that no longer needs preserving, you may be protecting familiarity at the expense of possibility. Every time you stay simply because leaving would make your previous effort feel wasted, you may be allowing the past to decide what the future is allowed to become. And every time you assume that changing direction means you failed to keep your commitment, you may be overlooking another truth. Sometimes changing what you are committed to is exactly how you become more faithful to yourself. So ask yourself quietly, are you staying because something is still right for you, or because you have already given so much to make it work? What are you protecting so faithfully that you have stopped asking whether it still nourishes you? These questions do not demand that you abandon everything familiar. They simply invite you to become more discerning about what deserves your patience, what deserves your loyalty, and what may be asking to take a different shape. Because your strength was never meant to become a cage. Your steadiness, your loyalty, your ability to build slowly and care deeply are not qualities you need to lose in order to grow. They become even more powerful when you stop using them automatically and begin choosing where they belong. And perhaps the deeper lesson for Taurus is not learning how to let go of everything, but learning the difference between commitment and attachment. between roots that nourish growth and roots that have simply become afraid to move. There is a moment when the ground beneath you can remain solid, even as something inside you begins to change. You can honor what you built without being required to live inside its original shape forever. You can acknowledge how much you gave without allowing that investment to decide what you must give next. And little by little, security can become something deeper than familiarity. The quiet knowledge that even when life changes its shape, you can still remain connected to yourself. There is an ancient idea about helping carry what another person cannot carry alone, while also remembering that every person has a weight that belongs to them. Taurus can understand the first part almost instinctively. You know how to stay when things become difficult, how to shoulder responsibilities without making a performance of it, how to become the solid ground someone else can lean against. But somewhere along the way, you may have forgotten that your own weight deserves to be acknowledged too, not because you are incapable of carrying it, but because constantly carrying everything alone can quietly turn strength into exhaustion. This is not about becoming selfish or abandoning the people and commitments that matter to you. It is about recognizing that a life built entirely around maintaining what everyone else depends on eventually leaves very little room for the person doing the maintaining. A foundation that supports every room but is never repaired will eventually begin to weaken beneath the surface. And there is often a moment when this pattern reaches its deepest point, not through some dramatic collapse, but through a quiet exhaustion that arrives after you have spent too long making sure everything around you remains standing. Maybe it happens at night when you finally return to a quiet room after spending the day taking care of responsibilities, solving practical problems, reassuring someone you love, or simply doing what needed to be done without asking whether you had anything left to give. Nothing necessarily went wrong that day. There may have been no argument, no crisis, no obvious reason for the heaviness in your chest. Yet you sit there and realize that you've spent so much time maintaining everyone else's sense of stability that you have barely checked the condition of your own inner world. And eventually a question becomes difficult to avoid. Is there a way to stop carrying so much without becoming someone you no longer recognize? Because this may be one of Taurus's deeper fears. It is not simply the fear of change. It is the fear that if you stop being the dependable one, you may discover that your identity has become tied to how much you can endure, preserve, and provide. What remains when you are no longer proving your strength by staying? What part of you exists beyond the responsibilities you have gathered, the promises you have kept, and the structures you have worked so hard to protect? This is where the question begins to turn in another direction. Caring for yourself is not a rejection of loyalty, and choosing a different path does not erase the devotion you once gave to the old one. In fact, it may be the missing part of your understanding of stability. A stable life cannot be built only around what you are capable of holding for everyone else. It also has to contain enough space for your own needs, your own values, and the parts of you that have quietly changed while you were busy keeping everything else intact. There is a particularly uncomfortable paradox here. Taurus can be remarkably aware of what other people need because you tend to notice what creates comfort, what feels dependable, what has become strained, and what needs practical attention. You may recognize when someone is exhausted, when they've been giving too much, or when they have stayed somewhere simply because leaving feels frightening. You can offer grounded advice with the calm certainty of someone who understands how much stability matters. But when the same wisdom turns toward you, something inside may hesitate, because suddenly the question is no longer about maintaining someone else's life. It is about examining the structure of your own. Imagine a home that you have spent years caring for. You know which boards need replacing, which rooms need attention, where the roof leaks when the weather changes, and which corners have slowly become neglected. You can walk through that house and immediately notice what everyone else needs, yet somehow keep postponing the room that belongs to you, not because you do not care about yourself, but because you have become so accustomed to maintaining the whole structure that your own needs start to feel like another task that can wait. This can also influence the people and situations you allow close to you. Without fully realizing it, you may become drawn toward relationships, responsibilities, or environments where your steadiness has an obvious purpose. When something needs fixing, preserving, organizing, or carrying, you know exactly where you stand. But when life becomes peaceful and nobody needs you to hold anything together, a strange feeling can surface. There may be relief, but alongside it, a subtle uncertainty, as though being useful has been easier to understand than simply being present. Notice what happens when someone you care about is struggling. You may quickly recognize the signs. They are exhausted because they have taken on too much. They are staying because they are afraid of disappointing someone, or they have forgotten what they need beneath all the responsibilities they carry. You may see these patterns with a remarkable clarity because you have spent years learning how to recognize the weight people carry. Yet, when someone gently places the same observation in your hands and asks you to look at your own life, something can become still. That stillness is not hypocrisy. It is protection. Because recognizing your own pattern means admitting that some of the structures you have worked so hard to preserve may also be structures you helped keep standing, even after they stopped giving you the security they once promised. And that realization can be difficult, because it does not simply ask you to change what surrounds you. It asks you to reconsider what you have believed about strength, loyalty, safety, and the things you thought you had to keep carrying in order to remain the person everyone could count on. It is often easier to help someone else recognize what is weighing them down than to admit that you may be carrying a similar weight yourself, only in a way that has become almost invisible to you. You can see when someone has stayed too long, given too much, or built their entire life around keeping something stable. Yet when that same pattern appears in your own life, your first instinct may be to keep maintaining it. What if, just once, you interrupted that instinct and looked at yourself with the same honesty you use when you quietly understand what someone else is going through? What would you notice if you stopped measuring your strength by how much you can continue carrying? What would you see if you looked beneath the routines, responsibilities, promises, and carefully maintained structures and asked what is actually happening inside you? For Taurus, this kind of self-observation can become the beginning of real change because you already know how to pay attention to what needs to be preserved around you. The deeper practice is learning to recognize what your own inner world has been asking you to protect, repair, or finally release. This does not mean becoming detached from everything you love. It does not mean suddenly deciding that loyalty is a weakness or that patience has no value. It means learning to direct those qualities with greater awareness, so that your ability to endure does not automatically become a reason to remain somewhere your heart has quietly outgrown. The deeper gift was never simply your ability to keep life steady. That is only the part everyone can see. The more meaningful gift may be what you have learned through every season that asked you to be patient, every disappointment that taught you what security really means. And every moment when you had to build yourself back onto solid ground. You have the capacity to turn experience into wisdom, to understand the value of what lasts, and to create something dependable from circumstances that once felt uncertain. But that gift becomes incomplete when all of your care is directed toward preserving the world around you, while your own inner life is left waiting for attention. Imagine a tree that has spent years growing deep roots around a particular piece of earth. Those roots have given it stability, strength, and the ability to withstand difficult weather. But even strong roots need room for the living tree above them to continue expanding. If the roots become so tightly bound to one place that they can no longer make space for new growth, what once provided security can slowly begin to restrict it. There is something similar in the way Taurus can relate to the life they have built. You may continue showing up because you remember how hard it was to create stability in the first place. You may keep giving your energy to something because walking away seems to make all those years of effort feel wasted, even when some quiet part of you knows that the situation has changed. And because you are capable of enduring more than people realize, others may never see the moment when endurance has stopped feeling like strength and started feeling like depletion. No one may ask whether you are tired because they have become accustomed to seeing you as the person who can handle things. You may have become so practiced at remaining composed that even you sometimes mistake exhaustion for another responsibility to manage. You keep watering the same ground, tending the same garden, repairing the same structure because continuing feels more familiar than standing still long enough to ask whether the soil is still fertile. But there is a difference between a tree that is deeply rooted and a tree that has been afraid to grow beyond the shape it first learned to take. The first has stability beneath it. The second has stability around it, but may no longer have enough room to reach toward what is calling it forward. Taurus does not need to become someone who constantly chases change. Your nature can remain deliberate, thoughtful, loyal, and grounded while still allowing life to evolve. That is where the possibility of transformation begins. You can choose to examine what you are holding without immediately throwing it away. You can ask whether a relationship still reflects your values, whether a responsibility still belongs to you, whether a familiar routine still gives you peace, or whether you have simply become very skilled at tolerating what once felt temporary. These questions are not demands to abandon your past. They are invitations to decide consciously what deserves a place in your future. And something subtle begins to change when you make that distinction. Your patience stops being a test of how much you can withstand and becomes a choice about what is genuinely worth nurturing. Your loyalty stops being measured by how long you can stay and becomes an expression of what you sincerely value. Your stability stops meaning that nothing is allowed to move and begins to mean that you trust yourself enough to remain grounded, even when something around you changes shape. You may notice the shift through very small things at first. A Taurus who finally admits, without embarrassment, that something no longer feels right. A Taurus who allows a trusted person to help, without feeling that accepting support somehow makes them less capable. A Taurus who pauses before automatically saying yes to another responsibility and asks whether there is actually space for it. None of these moments may look dramatic from the outside, but internally they can represent the rebuilding of a pattern that has been shaping your choices for years. Little by little, your life begins to feel less like something you must constantly preserve and more like something you are allowed to cultivate. There is a difference between maintaining a garden because you are afraid of what will happen if you stop and tending it because you genuinely love what can grow there. One comes from fear of losing control. The other comes from a conscious relationship with value, beauty, time, and care. Some people might call this maturity, others might call it healing, self-awareness, or personal growth. The label matters less than the experience itself, because underneath all those words is something very simple: the permission to exist without proving your worth through endurance. You do not have to demonstrate your value by carrying what everyone else has decided to leave in your hands. You can still be the dependable person. You can still build slowly, love deeply, keep your promises, and care about what lasts. But you no longer have to confuse permanence with purpose or familiarity with safety. Perhaps one of the greatest gifts available to Taurus is the realization that the life you built does not have to remain frozen in its original form to remain meaningful. Sometimes honoring what you have built means allowing it to become something more alive. There is a quiet beauty in that kind of strength. It is the strength of knowing that roots can remain deep while branches reach somewhere new, that solid ground does not have to mean standing still, and that protecting what matters sometimes requires making room for it to change. And perhaps the most important realization comes when you understand that you can become a place of safety for yourself, not by controlling every change, but by trusting that whatever shape life takes next, you do not have to abandon yourself in order to meet it.